For thousands of years, across every major civilization that ever rose to greatness, slavery wasn't a footnote. It wasn't a dark exception to an otherwise noble story. It was the engine. It was the foundation. It was the invisible force underneath every marble column, every golden statue, every philosophical idea, every military triumph that we still celebrate today. The ancient world that we glorify, Greece, Rome, Egypt, Mesopotamia, was built on the backs of human beings who were never given the dignity of being remembered by name. This is their story. To understand slavery in the ancient world, you have to go back further than Rome, further than Greece, further than Egypt. You have to go back to the very first moment that one human being looked at another and thought, I can use that person. The earliest confirmed evidence of slavery comes from ancient Sumer, modern-day Iraq, around 3500 BC. That's over 5,500 years ago. Archaeologists discovered clay tablets with cuneiform writing that listed human beings the same way they listed livestock and grain. Names, ages, tasks assigned, value recorded. These were not people in the records. These were inventory. But how did it start? What was the first moment that slavery became an idea someone acted on? The most honest answer historians have pieced together is this: it started with war. In the earliest human societies, when one tribe defeated another in battle, the losing side was often simply killed. It was brutal, but it was simple. Dead enemies don't cause problems. But at some point, and no one knows exactly when, someone made a calculation. A living captive is more valuable than a dead one. A living captive can work, can plant, can carry, can build, can be sold. That calculation changed everything. Once prisoners of war became a resource instead of a problem, an entire system began to build itself around that logic. Wars were now not just fought for territory or revenge. They were fought for labor. The defeated became the workforce of the victors, and the machinery of ancient civilization began to run on human fuel. From Sumer, the institution spread into Acadia, into Babylonia, into Egypt, into the Indus Valley, into China, into every corner of the ancient world where complex societies were forming, where labor was needed at scale, where someone with power looked at someone without it and saw an opportunity. By 2000 BC, slavery was not a practice, it was an institution. It had laws, it had markets, it had inherited logic passed from generation to generation as naturally as language. The world had normalized it before it had even fully formed. The oldest written legal code in human history, the Code of Hammurabi, written around 1754 BC in ancient Babylon, dedicates a significant portion of its 282 laws to the regulation of slaves. Not the abolition of slavery, the regulation of it. Law 15. If a man helps a slave escape, he shall be put to death. Law 16. If a man harbors a runaway slave, he shall be put to death. Law 17. If a man captures a runaway slave, he receives a reward. The very first sophisticated legal system humanity ever produced treated the ownership of human beings as a matter requiring organized protection. In Mesopotamia, slaves came from three primary sources. War captives made up the largest portion. Debt slaves, people who could not repay what they owed and surrendered themselves or their children as payment, made up another significant group. And born slaves, children born to enslaved mothers who inherited their mother's status at birth, completed the cycle, ensuring the institution reproduced itself without any new wars required. Babylonian slaves were branded or tattooed to mark their status. Some had their hair shaved into a distinctive style that identified them publicly. Running away was not just dangerous, it was a death sentence if you were caught. And in a world with no anonymity, no documentation, no way to disappear into a crowd without being recognized as property, being caught was almost inevitable. And yet, people ran. Constantly. Despite everything, they ran. Egypt is perhaps the most misunderstood civilization when it comes to slavery. For generations, the image burned into popular imagination is thousands of slaves being whipped while dragging stones to build the pyramids. Biblical epics made it iconic. Hollywood made it permanent. The reality was more complicated and in some ways more disturbing. Yes, Egypt had slaves, absolutely. Prisoners from military campaigns in Nubia, Libya, and Canaan were brought back and put to work. But the majority of pyramid builders, according to modern archaeological evidence, were actually paid Egyptian workers, skilled laborers who ate well, received medical care, and were buried with honor near the structures they built. That doesn't mean Egypt was gentle. It means Egypt was strategic. The enslaved population in Egypt served in households, in temples, in administrative roles, in agricultural work. Some enslaved people, particularly those taken from conquered regions who had valuable skills, found themselves in positions of surprising influence. A slave who could read, calculate, manage accounts, or practice medicine could become indispensable to a wealthy household. Some earned wages, some saved enough to buy their freedom. But these were exceptions floating on a sea of suffering. For the vast majority, the enslaved farmers, the domestic workers, the laborers in the quarries and mines under the Egyptian sun, there was no path out. You were owned. Your children would be owned, and the civilization that built monuments to eternal life gave no thought to the permanence of your suffering. Here is a fact that should stop you cold. The civilization that invented democracy, that gave the world the concept of citizen rights, of philosophical inquiry, of rational debate, of human dignity as an intellectual value, was simultaneously one of the most slave-holding societies in human history. At the height of Athens in the 5th century BC, between 1/3 and 1/2 of the entire population were slaves, not serfs, not indentured servants, slaves, owned outright, with no legal personhood whatsoever. The philosophers who sat in sunlit courtyards debating the nature of justice and the rights of man, they were served by enslaved hands. The food they ate was grown by enslaved labor. The beautiful buildings of the Acropolis were built with the participation of enslaved workers. The leisure time that allowed Greek citizens to philosophize, to vote, to compete in the Olympics, that leisure was purchased entirely by the forced labor of people Aristotle himself described as living tools. Aristotle didn't just accept slavery, he theorized it. He argued that some people were slaves by nature, that their rational capacity was fundamentally inferior, that being owned and directed by a superior mind was their natural state. The greatest philosopher the ancient world produced built an intellectual justification for human bondage that would be recycled and refined for the next 2,000 years. The Greeks obtained their slaves through war, through piracy, which was effectively state-sponsored in some periods, through the slave trade that moved captives across the Mediterranean, and through birth. Slave children born in a Greek household were called oikogenes, houseborn, and they were owned from their first breath. The worst fate available in Greece was the silver mines of Laurion, south of Athens. Those mines produced the silver that funded the Athenian navy, that paid for the democracy, that made Athens the most powerful city-state in the Greek world. And they were operated almost entirely by enslaved workers who chipped at rock in tunnels so narrow they had to work on their sides, breathing stone dust in total darkness for shifts that lasted until they collapsed. Life expectancy in those mines was measured in months, not years, months. The silver that built Athenian civilization was paid for in human lives at a rate of exchange so brutal it barely registered as remarkable to the Athenians themselves. If Greece was philosophy built on slavery, Rome was empire built on it.
At the height of the Roman Empire, roughly the first 2 centuries AD, historians estimate that between 30 and 40% of Italy's total population were slaves. In the city of Rome itself, some estimates put the slave population at close to 35%. That means in the greatest city on earth at that time, more than 1 in 3 people walking the streets were legally property. The Roman slave economy was the largest and most sophisticated slave system the ancient world ever produced, and it ran on industrial logic. Rome acquired slaves the way it acquired everything else, through conquest. Every military campaign produced captives. Every new province brought new populations into chains. When Julius Caesar conquered Gaul in the 1st century BC, ancient sources record that he enslaved approximately 1 million human beings in 1 decade of warfare, converted from free people into Roman property. Roman slaves worked in every sector of Roman life. In agriculture, on the massive latifundia, the great farming estates that replaced small family farms across Italy, enslaved workers labored in chain gangs from dawn to dark. In the mines of Spain and Britain, conditions mirrored the horror of Lorient: dark tunnels, stone dust, collapse, death. In the households of the wealthy, enslaved people served as cooks, cleaners, messengers, hairdressers, entertainers, accountants, doctors, and teachers. In the arena, some fought as gladiators, men whose survival depended on killing other men in front of cheering crowds. Roman law made the position of a slave absolutely clear. You were a thing, a res, a legal object. Your master had the power of life and death over you. None of these acts were crimes, they were property management. But Rome also produced resistance on a scale that no other ancient civilization matched. There were 3 major slave revolts in Roman history, and the last one became legendary. In 73 BC, a Thracian gladiator named Spartacus escaped from a gladiatorial training school in Capua with a group of approximately 70 other enslaved fighters. Within 2 years, that group had grown to an army of between 70,000 and 120,000 people. They defeated Roman legion after Roman legion. They held southern Italy for nearly 2 years. They came closer to threatening Rome itself when the revolt was finally crushed by the general Crassus in 71 BC. The Roman response was designed to be impossible to forget. 6,000 enslaved survivors were crucified. Their crosses were placed every 40 meters along the 200-kilometer road from Capua to Rome, the Appian Way. Every person who traveled that road for the months it took the bodies to decompose walked between a corridor of the dead. It was a message written in the only language Roman power truly trusted, and for a generation, it worked.
History tends to talk about slavery in numbers and systems, but numbers don't wake up before dawn on a cold stone floor. The daily life of an enslaved person in the ancient world was defined above everything else by the complete absence of control over any aspect of existence. You did not choose when to wake. You did not choose what to eat or whether to eat. You did not choose your work. You did not choose where to sleep. You did not choose who you spoke to, who you loved, whether you could keep your children, whether you would be sold tomorrow to a stranger in a city you'd never seen. Ancient sources, written entirely from the perspective of slaveholders, give us fragments. A Roman agricultural manual by Cato the Elder instructs farm owners on how to manage enslaved workers with the same tone used for managing livestock. Feed them this amount in summer, this amount in winter. Work them this hard when they are young. Dispose of them when they are no longer productive. The word "them" referred to people. Ancient medical texts noted that enslaved workers in mines showed specific patterns of lung damage from stone dust inhalation, silicosis we would call it today. They noted it the way you'd note wear patterns on a tool. useful information for calculating replacement costs. And yet, in the gaps of the record, in the archaeology of slave quarters, in the rare inscriptions left by freed slaves, in the scattered references to resistance, you find something that all the logic of the system was designed to prevent. You find humanity persisting. Enslaved people formed relationships. They fell in love. They raised children with ferocious protectiveness, even knowing those children could be taken at any moment. They maintained cultural practices from their homelands, languages, songs, religious rituals performed quietly in corners where no master was watching. They resisted in every way available to them, through deliberate slowness, through feigned incompetence, through sabotage, through flight, through the rare and extraordinary act of open revolt. They were, against every effort of the system that owned them, irreducibly human. Ancient slavery did not end with a revolution or a moral awakening. In Rome, it faded gradually as the empire contracted, as military conquests slowed and the supply of war captives dried up, as the economics shifted towards colony, tenant farmers who were technically free but practically bound to the land. The system transformed. It didn't end. The philosophical frameworks built to justify it, Aristotle's natural slavery, Roman legal definitions of persons versus things, survived the civilizations that created them. They were preserved in texts, studied in universities, ready to be picked up again centuries later when a new world decided it needed the same logic for the same purpose. The ancient world's greatest crime was not simply that it practiced slavery. It was that it built the intellectual, legal, and economic architecture of slavery so thoroughly, so carefully, so permanently, that the institution could be dismantled, reconstructed, exported across oceans, and operated at industrial scale in a world the ancient Romans never imagined, using justifications the ancient Greeks first wrote down. The pyramids still stand. The Parthenon still stand. The Colosseum still stand. The people who built them, who fed them, who funded them, who made the leisure and wealth and philosophical calm of the ancient world possible, were never given monuments. They were the monuments. Every stone lifted, every field harvested, every coin minted from silver, pulled out of a mine in darkness, that was their monument. Built without their consent, standing without their names. The ancient world called them property. History calls them a footnote. We should call them what they were: human beings, every single one. If history should be witnessed, not forgotten, subscribe.